If you've been told that waking up at 4 a.m. to scream at the sun and plunge into a bathtub filled with ice is the only variable between you and a seven-figure bank account, I have some rather unfortunate news for your morning routine. You aren't building wealth, you're just annoying your neighbors and giving your prefrontal cortex a thermal shock. In fact, for most of you, especially the deep-thinking introverts and the multi-passionate scanners who feel like your brain has 47 browser tabs open at all times, forcing yourself into these rigid industrial-age hustle rituals is the fastest way to trigger a biological strike in your skull. If you don't solve the underlying chemical mismatch between your high-fidelity hardware and your low-fidelity work habits, you aren't just losing an hour of sleep, you are losing the compounding interest of your cognitive sovereignty. You are trading your vivid, high-definition potential for a blurred, low-resolution existence where you're too fried to spot a real opportunity even if it slapped you in the face. Welcome back to Cognitive Blueprint. I'm not here to give you another cliché motivational lecture. Today, we are going to bypass your willpower entirely and look at the actual physics of your gray matter. We are going to decode the structural and chemical difference between what I call the broke brain and the millionaire brain through a dopamine masterclass that moves the conversation from shame to neurochemistry. The reason you've failed to stay consistent or disciplined in the past isn't because you lack grit. It's because you are operating on a broken reward system, specifically a hardware mismatch between your 200,000-year-old brain and the high-speed digital landscape. For the multitasker or the polymath, your brain is a high-performance machine, but currently it is being held hostage by your amygdala. Every time you look at a hard task, like building that side business or mastering a complex new skill, your amygdala, the brain's primitive smoke detector, sounds the alarm. It senses the metabolic cost of the work, looks for an immediate dopamine payout, finds none, and triggers a subtle freeze response. This leads to the ultimate paradox of the distracted mind. The harder you try to focus, the more your brain resists. You think you're being lazy, but neurologically, you're in a state of cerebral exhaustion. You've spent so much tonic dopamine on unearned rewards, like scrolling through short-form videos of people you don't even like, that when you sit down to do the actual work, your reward center is bone dry. This hits introverts hardest because you process information deeply, meaning you pay a much higher metabolic tax for every minute of unfocused stimulation. You feel wired but tired because your brain is currently running a high-speed engine with no oil. You aren't lazy, you're chemically uncalibrated, and you can't willpower your way out of a chemical imbalance any more than you can willpower a car with an empty tank to drive to the next city. To understand the shift from broke to millionaire status, we have to look inside the black box of the dopamine seesaw. Think of your brain like a high-end corporate office. Your prefrontal cortex is the CEO, logical, visionary, but very expensive to run. Your basal ganglia is the production floor, the autopilot workers who do things without thinking. The bridge between them is dopamine. Now, the broke brain is addicted to what we call cheap dopamine. This is the neurochemical equivalent of high fructose corn syrup. When you blast your system with unearned, erratic spikes from notifications and junk food, your brain triggers a process called downregulation. Your neural receptors literally retract to protect themselves from the noise. The millionaire brain, however, isn't about having more dopamine, it's about having a higher dopamine sensitivity. High performers and elite integrators have tuned their neurochemistry to the process, not the result. In neuropsychology, we call this managing reward prediction error. When you successfully hack this loop, your brain stops viewing hard work as a cost and starts viewing it as a high-quality fuel. Data from the Flow Genome Project suggests that when you reach this state, your brain flushes out stress hormones and replaces them with a potent cocktail of norepinephrine and anandamide. The turning point for you is realizing that focus is not a result of character, it is a result of chemistry. You aren't broke because you're incompetent, you're broke because your internal CEO is currently screaming into an empty room while the entire staff is passed out in a sugar crash from too much cheap stimulation. We are going to stop trying to be a worker bee who grinds more hours and start being the architect who rigs the chemistry of the entire building. The aha moment comes when you realize that wealth is simply the byproduct of a brain that is sensitive enough to hear the quiet music of deep, complex tasks over the deafening roar of the digital void. So, if the CEO in your head is currently screaming into an empty room while the rest of your neural staff is passed out in a sugar crash, the question isn't how you get more willpower, it's how you stop the chemical strike and reclaim your cognitive capital. We need to move from being a user who is being harvested by an algorithm to being a neuro-architect who rigs the game in their own favor. The secret to ending the cycle of being broke and fried isn't to work 16 hours a day, it's to use a process I call the Wealth Circuitry Launch. This is a tactical 10-minute biological protocol designed to bypass the vending machine of cheap hits in the corner and force your staff back to the boardroom. We are going to perform a literal arbitrage on your brain, trading those low-quality, destructive spikes for the expensive dopamine that fuels a high-output, M-shaped career. The sequence begins at minute 0 with what I call the Metabolic RAM Flush. Since we know your brain is currently cluttered with the residue of 1,000 shallow social pings and unreturned messages, we have to provide it with what researchers call psychological closure. Grab a physical piece of paper and write down every unfinished task, every scanner project you're worried about, and every random idea currently leaking your mental energy. By externalizing these open loops, you are sending a biological signal to your prefrontal cortex that the data is safe. This instantly drops your extrinsic load, the mental noise that causes brain lag, and clears the buffer for actual processing power. You aren't just making a list, you are performing a high-speed factory reset on your focus, allowing the CEO to finally see the desk underneath the clutter. Once the RAM is flushed, we move into the leverage pruning phase from minute 2 to minute 5. This is where you use your scanner brain's greatest gift, far transfer. Instead of looking at your to-do list like a mountain of laundry, I want you to look at it like a chessboard. Ask yourself, which 20% of these tasks will generate 80% of my financial movement? If you have a dozen paths glowing in your mind, you need to identify the one lead domino, the task that, once completed, makes the other 11 easier or entirely irrelevant. By using your high IQ to find the shortcut rather than the struggle, you are rewarding your evolutionary drive for efficiency. You are moving from a state of reactive grind to a state of strategic integration. You are no longer the worker bee, you are the architect flipping the specific switches that light up the entire building. But wait, because between minutes 7 and 9, you are going to encounter the hidden obstacle, what I call the minute 8 poverty trap. This is the moment your brain realizes the cheap dopamine vending machine has been locked and the high-octane work has begun. You will feel a sudden, almost physical surge of boredom and restlessness. Your brain will try to convince you that just one quick check of your phone is necessary for your career, or that you should really be researching the history of 14th century plumbing right now. This is a biological trap. It is the literal sound of your neural receptors upregulating, building more antennae to catch the smaller, quieter signals of deep work. To bypass this, we use a physiological anchor, 2 deep, sharp inhales through the nose and 1 long, slow exhale through the mouth. This resets your vagus nerve, stops the stress response, and initiates the release of anodyne, the bliss molecule that allows your brain to glide into a state of transient hypofrontality. If you can push through that itch of boredom at minute 8, you reach the state of cognitive ease, where the work finally begins to glide. Imagine your life 30 days from now, once this protocol has become your default setting. You are no longer the person trying to be successful while fighting a daily war against their own chemistry. You have become the master of the system. You wake up and your prefrontal cortex is clear because it isn't clogged with digital exhaust. You sit down to work on your primary pillar and the real work feels as stimulating as a video game because you've recalibrated your reward threshold. You've shifted your identity from a distracted dabbler to an elite integrator. You realize that your curiosity, your scanner nature, isn't a liability that keeps you broke, it's a superpower that, when protected by a neural firewall, allows you to build a life of profound depth and financial leverage that no specialist could ever dream of. The self-blame ends today. You weren't lazy, you were just using an outdated blueprint. You weren't meant to be a cog in a machine, you were designed to be the bridge builder between different worlds of knowledge. To help you install this wealth circuitry launch and identify your specific cheap dopamine triggers, I've put together a resource called the Millionaire Brain Blueprint. It's a minimalist PDF that maps out the exact RAM Flush scripts and leverage formulas for your specific brain type, providing a literal standard operating procedure for your gray matter. You can grab it at the link below. I want to hear from you in the comments. What is the most expensive goal you are officially funding with your reclaimed focus today? Let's dismantle those shallow simulations together. And if you're ready to see how this reclaimed brain handles the most wicked career environments of the future, you need to watch our next video on the M-shaped professional, where we take this laser focus and point it at the ultimate career structure. Reclaim your capital. Builds the bridge. You are watching Cognitive Blueprint, and I will see you in the next one.